Nevada. My name is George Knapp, your occasional host, designated driver of the airwaves, and moderator of tonight's upcoming cacophonous cavalcade of conversation. Happy Father's Day to all the dads out there, and to all the rest of us who are thinking about our fathers on this day. You know, the barbecues are finished for the day, the dishes may or may not have been washed, kids should be tuckered out by now, so time for dad and mom and anyone else still awake to settle in and hunker down. We got a good one for you tonight. We're in the middle of something that's pretty amazing. It's not exactly disclosure. In fact, I'd say it's not even close to disclosure, really, but something significant is unfolding. It's sort of like a dam that develops a tiny crack, and then water starts to kind of seep out. And then the seep becomes a leak, and the leak becomes a trickle. And the trickle becomes a stream, and you can see where I'm going with this. I think we're somewhere in between the trickle and stream stages when it comes to UFO news. You know, this subject continues to generate headlines and news coverage around the world. And one particular UFO case is sort of the wedge. It's the tool being used to plow the way, hopefully for more to come. You know, as usual, coast-to-coast listeners knew about the Tic Tac case first. We had a couple of programs where the Tic Tac episode was discussed in detail before the announcements from To the Stars Academy, before the New York Times story broke last December. You might remember a friend and colleague of mine, Jeremy Corbell, had been working on the story for a couple of years and been in touch with some of the key participants. And so much has come out since then. F-18 pilot Dave Fravor has done interviews with major media outlets and news networks. The folks at To the Stars have used the Tic Tac incident to prove the subject deserves to be studied. New witnesses are coming forward to tell what they know. One of those is Kevin Day, who came forward a couple of weeks ago on social media, told the world that he was an eyewitness and direct participant in the events of November 2004 off the coast of Southern California. Kevin gave his first interview a couple of days ago. He spoke with another military UFO eyewitness, John Burroughs. Tonight, Kevin is here to tell us not only what he and others saw, but how his Navy superiors handled things back then. In related news, back in May, yours truly was able to uncork a document, a 13-page report about the Tic Tac incidents, plural, incidents. And then just a week or so ago, Dr. Hal Puthoff, physicist, has had a public presentation. The first public presentation about Tic Tac and ATIP, that's the Pentagon study of UFOs, or as some call them, AAVs, another term used by the military. Dr. Puthoff, you'll recall, was our guest earlier this year, and he cut loose with information that had not been made public before, along with physicist Dr. Eric Davis. There's news popping out all over the place about Tic Tac and related incidents, and tonight we'll try to make some more. Kevin Day was on board the USS Princeton, part of the Nimitz carrier group. He was right in the middle of all those events that went down during a period of several days. It wasn't just one incident or one encounter, it was several. And I think Kevin is not going to be the last of naval personnel to come forward and share accounts of what happened. It's just a prediction. Actually, it's more than a prediction. It's happening. We're going to know more soon. Kevin Day joins us in just a few minutes, and we can't wait. Also tonight, scientists and academics who take the paranormal seriously are few and far between these days. Those who study mediums and spirits are even more rare. Enter Jack Hunter, anthropologist, and author of a new book, Engaging the Anomalous, tackling paranormal subjects from the prism of anthropology, which it turns out is an excellent platform from which to observe and study these controversial subjects. Jack Hunter joins us in the second half tonight, and I'm really looking forward to that as well. Thanks to all the listeners who've been sending me emails and messages, wondering where the heck I've been. And I know one group is listening tonight in the Stanley Hotel. Remember the movie The Shining? The Stanley is that grandly spooky place that was used in that movie. There's a Comic-Con convention underway, I think it was in Denver, or in the area around Denver, and the folks who are doing a little ghost hunt tonight were part of that Comic-Con event. Be careful out there, folks. Also, those of you who've been sending me pics of your jammies, from flannel to black satin, thank you very much. I'm not asking for, I don't want people to send me pictures of them in their jammies, but I now realize that I probably need to go shopping because nothing that I have at home is in the same league as what I've been seeing. Webmaster Lex and I have pulled together our usual assortment of items and oddities culled from various news sources around the world. We call it Nap's News. You can find it on the Coast website. We have a couple of items related to the Tic Tac there tonight, including a transcript of Dr. Hal Puthoff's presentation made at the SSE convention earlier this month. We also have that story broken by our I-team with the 13-page analysis of the Tic Tac encounters, the report itself, so you can read it if you haven't seen it, and an audio interview with a new witness named Trevor. You might remember that during one of our earlier programs that focused on Tic Tac, a listener named Trevor called in, and he said he'd been on board the Nimitz during these events. Well, it turns out his story checks out. His credentials are real. His service record has been verified, and you can hear his version of these events and a few other non-UFO items on Nap's News about weird phenomena, things we simply can't explain. With that, let's assume the position. It's too hot outside for the dog and cat, so bring them in. Make a spot for them. Put on a pot of Joe, slip into those jammies. You pick the color and fabric. Flop down in a comfy spot. Turn down the lights and turn up the radio, because we're about ready to rumble. In a moment, Operations Specialist, Intercept Controller, Kevin Day, the Tic Tac Encounters. I'm George Knapp, and this is Coast to Coast AM. As I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, the Tic Tac UFO incident was known to Coast listeners almost 2 years ago, I think. I'm trying to remember when that first broadcast was, but most of the rest of the world found out back in December when the New York Times reported its blockbuster story. And at the same time, the To the Stars Academy unleashed a pair of videos that somehow had been squeezed out of the Pentagon, videos which show encounters between U.S. military aviators and unknown, unidentified craft that were capable of astounding maneuvers and astounding speed. Much has been written since then, a lot of it kind of snarky, which I guess is to be expected. But this is a genie that can't be put back in the bottle. The new witness to come forward and talk about it is Kevin Day. Kevin is a retired U.S. Navy Senior Chief Petty Officer, a former operations specialist, and Top Gun Air Intercept Controller with more than 20 years' experience in Strike Force air defense, including wartime operations. He's logged hundreds of hours. It was Kevin's team on the USS Princeton's Combat Information Center that discovered fleets of anomalous air contacts, now known as the Tic Tac UFOs, in the skies above Southern California. Kevin, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming forward. I know it must be somewhat harrowing experience.
Thank you, George. It is definitely my honor and pleasure to be here with you tonight.
You told John Burroughs that you joined the Navy after seeing the Tom Cruise movie Top Gun, but you didn't want to be Tom Cruise, right?
I did not want to be Tom Cruise. Correct.
So what did you go into? What was your training?
I joined boot camp and immediately went to operations specialist school out in Virginia and became an operations specialist. My first assignment was a USS Vincennes out of San Diego.
Operations specialist means what? What's the equipment that you have at your disposal? What kinds of things?
Specialists are the personnel inside the Combat Information Center on board the ships, and we are the people that actually fight the ships in the event that we have to fight the ships. We control the radars, the guns, the missiles, control the aircraft, the helicopters, do all the operational planning and communications.
Some of the people who have served with you, and their names are not being made public, describe you as the man. You were the man. And I think Dave Fravor, the commander of the Black Aces Squadron that was sent to intercept the Tic Tac, described you as his third wingman. Is that right?
Indeed, I was then, and I still feel that way today. This is one of the reasons why I came out when I did.
Meaning you came out because Dave Fravor was out on that limb all by himself.
He was indeed, wasn't he? Very, very brave man to do that.
You have not been, you're not familiar with the UFO world, so I would imagine it was kind of a surprise how snarky and negative it gets pretty quickly.
Yeah, there are a lot of hucksters and people into this just to make a quick buck, I think. And I want to say right off the top, I am not on that team. I definitely want to do the right thing here and just tell the story as I saw it.
Were you a UFO guy at all? Had you had any interest in the topic before then? I know you had said in the earlier interview you did not have any other encounters while you were with the Navy. You didn't detect any other unknowns, right? Or maybe at least unknowns like this.
Oh, at least not unknowns like this, correct. I've been a coast-to-coast listener since the mid-'90s, so of course I've always been interested in UFOs, but that was the first time I ever intercepted them with Super Hornets.
Well, excellent. You've been a coast listener. I had no idea. That's great. Good. So let's set the stage a little bit. The Nimitz group. I mean, these are the best of the best. These are the best pilots and aviators. It's the most advanced weapons systems, the best radars and sensors. This is a potent, frightening military force, a force to be reckoned with, correct? I mean, I know you can't describe in any detail what the equipment can do, but can you just describe what it's like to be part of a fighting force like that?
You're a very busy person in that environment. You're constantly underway, constantly doing training, constantly going to meetings, constantly giving presentations and briefs. And at the same time, it's a very exciting career field. Now, just to kind of set the scene here a little bit, we were off the coast of Southern California, off San Diego, with the Nimitz Strike Group. It was the USS Princeton, the USS Chaffee, the U.S. Higgins VAW-117, which is the E-2 Hawkeye Squadron, and Commander Air Group 11. Now, the USS Princeton was an air defense commander for the strike group, meaning that we were tasked with defending the strike group in a case that we had to. And we were conducting an exercise called Composite Unit Training Exercise, or COMP-2X. It's sort of a graduation exercise that ships strike groups complete before they go on deployment.
You mentioned the Hawkeye, and in our report, the story that I had done last month, the ANSPY capabilities. I mean, the technology in the white world, meaning the unclassified world, there are articles that are written about these technologies, and they're amazing. They're amazing, and that was 14 years ago. I know you can't get into many details, but I mean, these things, I think one of those systems, either Hawkeye or the ANSPY, it was said it could track a golf ball 100 miles away. Is that an exaggeration, or do you want to not even mention that?
Let's not mention that.
Okay. But it was because your sensors, I don't know which sensors it is, which radar it was, but because you sort of had something set at long range, you were looking way, way out. Because of that, you were the first guy really to pay attention to or notice tic-tac, right?
That is correct. We had the Spy 1 radar, Aegis ship. And on or about the 10th of November 2004, I went up to combat. I was working on evaluations for some of my people, and I was just sitting in the back of it on the air side of combat. Now, combat on the ship is broken into a sub, surface, and air side to kind of break up the workload. I was sitting back there, and I noticed these tracks on the scope. I didn't really think much about them at first. There was 8 to 10 of them at the time, and they were tracking. They came into my radar coverage right off the coast of right in the vicinity of the Catalina Islands, and they started tracking south. And the strange thing about them is they were 28,000 feet going 100 knots, which is really, really strange. Usually things that high don't go that slow.
That's really slow. It should fall out of the sky.
It should definitely be falling out of the sky.
So I think I heard that you said that was somewhere coming from the direction of Catalina Island or over Catalina Island?
That's where I picked them up at. Right over the vicinity of Catalina.
You're describing them as sort of traced images, like ghost images. Are you able to sort of lock onto them, or are they appearing and disappearing? Are you having trouble tracking them?
They were tracked perfectly. They were the highest quality radar contact that's available on the Spy 1 radar.
And you wonder yourself, what the heck is that?
I did indeed. I'd never seen anything like it. And I immediately, of course, I got on through email and on the back channel and contacted some of my friends on the other ships just to verify they were seeing the same thing and that it wasn't a malfunction of our radar. And
so?
And I just wanted to be sure, and sure enough, everyone else was seeing them too at that time. But I have to say, George, at that point in time, I in no way considered these things of any type of hostile intent, so I wasn't really that concerned about them at the moment.
Yeah, you've got a lot of stuff to do, and you're wondering, well, what the heck is that? The other guys don't know what it is, but they've confirmed. So it's not your equipment that's malfunctioning. Others are seeing it as well.
Correct.
Well, I mean, that goes a long way to suggesting that it was real. I mean, it wasn't, lens flare or birds or something like that.
Definitely not. These things were definitely real. Again, they had the highest track quality that's available on the Aegis system.
There was never a point where they were coming in the direction of the Nimitz or had any kind of hostile intent that you could perceive. They weren't heading directly toward the ships. They were just kind of floating around out there.
That's true. Although they were attracted south and we were south of them, if they continued on the way they were going, they were going to come probably no closer to us than about 40 miles.
And in a situation like that, you said you reached out to your counterparts, your contemporaries on the other ships. Are you speaking to them? Are you emailing? How are you communicating?
I did both. I emailed them and I got on the back channel radios and talked to them. And meanwhile, my entire team on Princeton is trying to figure this thing out. We have certain procedures that we go through, of course, whenever there's an unidentified air contact. And believe me, we were going through our checklist, trying to figure out what these things are, because that's our job.
You have protocols, right, that where you, as you mentioned, a checklist. Could it be ice crystals? Could it be XYZ? Where you try to figure out the unidentifieds, because I think, as I've heard you say, there's a lot of stuff up there floating around or flying around that we don't know what it is.
That's correct. We definitely have checklists that we use.
And in this case, when do you go down that checklist? Is it after you get off your ship, or because
every time that we contact an unidentified contact, we use the same standard checklist and the same standard procedure in combat. And sometimes we'll have multiple unknowns, and you have to be able to process them very quickly so you can move on to the next unknown or the next event.
So these 8 to 10 things, are they flying in a formation?
They were in a very loose formation, George. It kind of resembled, if you can imagine, watching snowflakes fall from the sky. North being the top part of the scope and south being the bottom part of my scope. I was watching these things, and they all stayed in a relative position to each other, and they just kind of slowly tracked down the scope towards the south.
So and then what happened? They just disappear, vanish off the scopes, or what?
Yeah, and this was on or about the 10th of November, and it was the first time I saw them. And I made note of it. I went down and I got up the next morning. I came back up to combat, and they had disappeared in the night. And when I came back up, they were there again. And this went on for a couple days. Now, I wasn't really concerned about them until the morning of the 14th, when we had an air defense exercise scheduled. We call it an ADEX, and that's when I became concerned, because these objects in the sky, they represented a real hazard to safe flight operations.
Meaning something could fly off of the Nimitz and run into them, and it gets jammed in there. There's a mid-air collision. It could take something down.
And then folks are wondering, well, how come you guys didn't do something about it? How come you didn't say something about it? What were you doing?
So you detected them on November 10th. The other guys on the other ships detected them on November 10th. Then you detect them more? I mean, it continues for the next 4 days?
I would have to say during the time frame of November 10th to about November 16th, if I had to count up all the contacts that we saw, it would be well in excess of 100.
And was it always 8 or 10 of these objects, or was it sometimes less, or sometimes more?
It was always around 8 or 10.
They couldn't have been one object.
It was never just one object.
All right, we're talking with Kevin Day about the Tic Tac UFO encounters. By the way, June 18th, 1942. Young man was born in Liverpool, who went on to be Sir Paul McCartney. Happy 76th birthday to Sir Paul McCartney. Here's a song called Whole Life, partnered up with Dave Stewart.
AM with George Knapp.
This is a great song called Run It Wild by our friend Robbie Williams, who performed this week on the biggest possible stage. He opened the World Cup festivities in Russia and managed to put his own twist on things, stir it up a little bit. We're going to have Robbie on the show sometime. He listens to every broadcast, I think. At least that's what he tells me as he travels around the world. Interesting guy. We're talking with Kevin Day, who had served on the USS Princeton, and by now our listeners are familiar with, of course, the Tic Tac video clip that's been released. It was recorded when F-18s were sent to check out this Tic Tac, but Kevin Day just told us there were probably, it wasn't just one incident, there were probably 100 total encounters that were detected, multiple objects, 8 to 10 Tic Tacs per encounter, traveling in sort of loose formations. It's not one case. It's not a malfunction of equipment one time. It's a lot of different witnesses seeing this on their radar screens. And in a moment, we're going to hear Kevin describe some of the events that happened that you probably were unaware had occurred. We'll be right back with more Coast to Coast AM. Kevin Day, you had mentioned that you thought that there might have been 100 different sightings or detections of Tic Tac objects in various numbers and various formations. How many people, fellow radar guys on the Princeton were probably aware of this?
No less than 20.
No less than 20? And the same thing could have been true on the other ships?
It absolutely was true.
So there are a lot of witnesses to this part of the story, right?
I believe it was probably the most witnessed and probably the most well-documented UFO encounter in recorded history.
Did you at some point decide to take it up the chain of command and say, look, we need to deal with this. This has been going on for days, and, we're coming into a more active part of the exercise out here. We need to do something?
Absolutely. If I could describe what happened a little bit, it was the morning of the 14th. And the captain of the ship, who's the air defense commander for the strike, comes down to combat. I got pulled him off to the side. I said, Captain, as you know, we've been watching these things for several days now. I don't think their intentions are in any way hostile. My concern is safety of flight, because we're getting ready to put a bunch of aircraft in the air, and I highly recommend that we go out and investigate one of these things and see what they are. Because if something happens, if there's a mid-air a hazard of a mishap of any type, they're going to ask, why didn't we do that? He immediately concurred. Now, there was a pair of F-18 Super Hornets airborne from DFA 41 to Black Ace, who was actually the first event of the day for the upcoming air defense exercise. And we took control of the flight and started to vector him towards the UFOs.
Keep going with the story.
We started vectoring him towards the unknown objects in the sky. I don't hesitate to call them UFOs.
What were these things? Now, you've had a lot of time to think about it since. What do you think these things were doing? And they're just zipping around. It's not like they're rendezvousing with a platform out there or buzzing an oil platform, and they're not buzzing your ships. In fact, they sort of are there incidental to your presence. They've shown no interest in the Nimitz group at all, right?
That's correct. I think they had no interest at all in this. I think that will become obvious after I complete my story. I really do believe they just wanted to be left alone. They were going.
Well, go ahead and tell the story. You tell your captain, hey, we need to do something about it. The F-18 started heading that way. What happened?
Well, it was pretty quiet until the fast people flight came into the visual arena of the closest contact that my air controller steered them to. His call sign is poison. And all of a sudden on the radio we have an overhead speaker. All of a sudden I hear, oh my God, I'm engaged. And right at that moment, this object, whatever it was that he was now merged with on our plot, fell straight out of the sky from 28,000 feet down to the surface of the ocean. What I found out later was 0.78 seconds. just fell out of the sky straight to the surface of the ocean. Commander Fravor, that was his flight. The pilot that you introduced earlier, he follows it down. He gets down into the vicinity and he sees something in the water. And I found out later he thought it was actually some sort of crashed airplane or something. So he's now concerned. He goes back up to his assigned altitude, and as soon as he's clear of the area, this object comes right back out of the water, straight back up to 28,000 feet, and started tracking south again at 100 knots, as if nothing interesting at all happened.
So the stories that we have heard and published accounts that we've read and what Dave Fravor has said in interviews is that he was flying over this. He was going to check out the Tic Tac. He could see it, but he couldn't really lock onto it. At least the radar would lock onto it. His helmet cam or lens could see it. He could see it with his eyes, but they couldn't lock onto it radar-wise. And then he saw a giant 100 yards across area of disturbed, frothing water, right?
That's correct. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. I only found out those details sometime later.
So you can't hear him. You can't really see what he's seeing. You don't have access to the cameras that are on board his planes.
That's correct. My presentation was two symbols on my radar display, and the systems he used to. And it's true, he was unable to get a radar lock, although he did have him with his eyeballs, and he had him with a forward-looking infrared radar system and also the television camera system that's on the aircraft.
I know that he felt that there might be something really big, like a crashed plane under the water, but he, as far as the accounts that I've heard, there's no confirmation that something entered or came out of the water, but you're saying something did.
I believe that it did at this point, yes. And again, I did see with my own eyes, so I have to kind of go on the post-encounter reports that I'm hearing from other sailors.
What is the significance of the fact that you're tracking it? You're on the ship and you're tracking it. You see the two dots on your screen. He's there. He's flying around. He sees it with his eyes, but he can't lock his radar onto it. That's a pretty interesting stealth-type technology then, right?
That, especially at the same altitude, and carried on to the south as if nothing at all had happened.
There's a physicist named.
In light of the fact that we just witnessed this thing fall straight out of the sky in less than a second down to the surface of the ocean, and then once he was gone, it popped straight back into the sky nuisance.
There's a physicist named Dr. Bruce McAbee who worked for the U.S. Naval Observatory for a long time, and he's, maybe Kevin, you've seen on Facebook, he posted some analysis based on your description of this thing moving that far, 0.78 seconds. He estimates the speed would have been 48,000 miles per hour. You're pretty familiar with what's in the American inventory. We don't have something like that, do we?
No, we don't. And on that note, there were no sonic booms noted. This thing did whatever it did without creating a sonic boom, which is absolutely amazing.
I think I heard you also describe, and this may not be something you detected personally, but in further conversations with your counterparts, that these things had been detected at 80,000 feet, zipping down to the surface of the water, just hovering 50 feet above the water, something like that. Is that basically true based on what you know?
Based on what I know, it's absolutely true. Now, my radar presentation, the mode of my radar that I was looking at wasn't set up to view anything that high, although I do trust the other operators and the radar technicians that have told me that they actually saw these things going from outer space to 80,000 feet.
So from outer space to 80,000 feet, from 80,000 feet down to 50 feet, that's pretty amazing. Do we have anything that can do that you know of?
Not to my knowledge.
You know, a lot of people have suggested, well, this is some kind of a drone test, that another branch of the Navy or the military is testing something to see how the Nimitz group would react to this technology, but it's ours. What do you think about that?
I think that's a plausible theory, sure. I'm not absolutely convinced there was aliens on these things.
Yeah, I mean, how could you be? They're not exactly spilling the beans. It's just an unknown, right?
Yeah, and I'm trying very hard to keep my personal opinion out of this conversation. I pretty much just want to tell everyone what I saw and what everyone around me saw.
Dave Fravor and his counterpart, they have that encounter. They come back. When do you see the video? You don't see video right away, right?
I got the video, the same video that came out in the New York Times with the object suddenly zorching off to the left-hand side of the screen. I had that exact same video in my email the very next morning. The video is legitimate.
You had the same video, the same clip, or was there more to what you had?
It was exactly the same clip. And I happened to be at work when it came on TV. And you can imagine my surprise when I saw that video on TV after all these years. The only reason why I didn't take that video with me 14 years ago was because it was on the secret computer system. And so I left it there when I transferred into civilian life.
Dave Fravor comes back.
The last 14 years.
I want to come back to that. Dave Fravor comes back, and then other planes are dispatched. They have their own encounters. Am I correct?
You are absolutely right. Of course, everyone is now listening to this intercept. So we have a bunch of other planes taking off in preparation for the ADEX event that's getting ready to kick off at 9 o'clock in the morning. And all of a sudden, the next thing we know, we got all these other pilots doing autonomous intercepts on their own. And they're going after these things. And I'm telling you what, George, at one point, it was raining UFOs. Not just
Describe that. What do you mean?
Not just one object fell out of the sky, but all of them fell out of the sky. They were splashing down all around us. And as soon as the pilots went back up to their assigned altitudes, the objects popped all back into the sky to 28,000 feet and kept going at 100 knots as if nothing exciting had happened.
So the pilots hear what's going on with Dave Fravor, and they're doing what pilots do. Gosh, I need to get over there. I need to engage this thing. I need to see it for myself, right?
Correct.
Because that's who becomes a Navy pilot, somebody who would want to get out there and go after it.
Absolutely right.
And then as that is happening, these things start raining down all over. Do they get closer to the ships?
No, they never really came close to us. They were well to the east of us, and their intercept point was still, even if they would have just kept going south, they were going to cross well to the east of us. Never really coming over the top of the aircraft carrier.
I guess if they had started heading toward the carrier, there would have been a defensive response. What would have happened?
We would have launched the alert that was prepared, armaments, missiles, and we would have made another intercept and tried to figure out what the intentions were.
But it must have been a harrowing experience nonetheless, even though I think I heard you say they're 40 miles away from the ships. Still, to have these things, as you described them, raining down all over the place, multiple objects, that's a pretty spooky moment.
Yeah, I was a very humbled man that day. All of the years of training, all the time and effort, all of the experience that I had, and all of the experience and training that everyone else around me had, George, we were totally ineffectual. I believe in my heart of hearts, if they had a hostile intent, there was nothing at all we could have done about it anyway.
One of the most intriguing parts of the story is this event involving the cap point, involving Commander Fravor. Can you describe what the cap point is, what happened in regard to his cap point, and why it's so unusual?
Absolutely. In Strike Group Air Defense, we have arbitrary points in the sky that are socialized with all the players, so everyone knows where the point is. And essentially, that's an anchor point for the airborne interceptors. It's just an arbitrary point in the sky that we pick, and we brief it ahead of time. Now, the strange thing is, during Commander Fravor's intercept, this object suddenly disappeared off the scope, just vanished, and suddenly reappeared right at his cap station.
And I think in the document that I read, Poison, the guy with the code sign Poison, is the one who tells Fravor about it, right? Can you relate that conversation?
Yes, he did.
What did he say? How did he say it?
He said, sir, you're not going to believe this. The flight said, go ahead, Charlie, was our call sign. He said, well, the unknown is at your cap station. That was followed by a long stunned silence on the radio.
So it's like the Tic Tac knew where the rendezvous point was, what the cap station was.
Somehow it did.
As if, I don't know, could you hack an onboard computer of an F-18? Is that...
In the scenario that you described earlier, these things were a drone and there was some kind of test going on. It doesn't become quite as mysterious now because whoever conducting the test would have, of course, had receipt of our message traffic. They would have known where the cap stations were.
I find that scenario an interesting one, the idea that another branch of the military would test some amazing technology over a carrier group with the possibility that there could be actual engagement at some point.
Well, if they were going to do it, it would be a good time to do it because we were in a training environment right off the coast of the homeland. And when we're doing training, we typically do not fly around with the missiles on board, missiles on the wings and ammo in the guns.
Right. I remember Fravor saying that when he was sent that way, he was asked whether he had any munitions, I guess, armaments, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And are you the guy that asked that?
Yeah, we did. The tactical action officer, and I won't say her name at the moment, because there's lots of folks in this that either don't want to come out or haven't been contacted yet, so I'm going to be real careful with the names, if that's okay, George.
Sure.
She gets on the radio and she says, say your state, say your loadout. And again, there was a stunned silence because that was a very strange question to hear. Because everyone knows they don't have a loadout in a training environment. They do have a what's called a CATM-9 CATM-9 training missile on board that just simulates an actual missile. That's all they had.
Can you describe for me sort of the aftermath of this? So at some point the Tic Tacs go away, right? They just poof, they're done.
Yeah, the wave during that morning on the 14th, during the 8X period, they did eventually all go away, tracked off to the south, and it was only later that night that they came back.
So they all of these objects, maybe 100. I don't know how many there were total. You mentioned about
when I say 100, George, I mean over the course of the week that we were watching them.
So whatever bunch it was, they tracked off to the south, and then pretty soon they're either out of range or they vanished.
Correct.
And then they come back again at night into the same general area?
Nope, a brand new formation up at Catalina Island again. Same flight profile, 28,000 feet, tracking south at 100 knots. Again,
are there other sensors there at Catalina that would have picked it up and detected the same thing?
I'm hearing reports now. There's all kinds of people stepping forward, from fishing boats, from private pilots to land-based radar operators. Quite a few people actually listening.
Well, whatever this is, it's an unknown. It's amazing technology. It was seen by dozens and dozens of qualified naval personnel and, heroic aviators like Dave Fravor. It was real, whatever it was. It was real and detected on multiple systems and seen by multiple eyewitnesses. And yet the reaction to the Tic Tac encounters was not entirely positive. And when we come back, we're going to get into some of that. I'm talking with Kevin Day about the now famous Tic Tac UFO encounters. More than just one of these craft were detected out there off the coast of Southern California. Ray Charles takes us into the break, and I'm playing that for my dad, who just absolutely loved Ray Charles. The song's called What I Said. We'll be right back.
From coast to coast and worldwide on the internet. This is Coast to Coast AM with George Knapp. Now, here's George.
Middle of the Road, 1983, The Pretenders. Great song. We're talking with Kevin Day, credible military witness, widely respected by his peers, known as an honest man, a guy who led a stellar military career. We've verified his credentials. He says the Tic Tac UFO case was far more spectacular than what has been reported, that there were dozens of direct witnesses, multiple craft displaying credible technology. Doesn't mean they were space aliens. They were unidentified. They're unknowns. As one report called them, they were AAVs, advanced aerial vehicles. At one point, Kevin Day says it was raining UFOs around the USS Nimitz, a carrier group. In a moment, we're going to get into reactions to the information that's surfaced so far. A lot of it has been pretty hostile. And then maybe ask Kevin about whether he's been able to hook up with any of his former shipmates in terms of sharing stories and notes about what happened back then. We'll be right back. Kevin Day, the story you've shared with us is pretty amazing stuff. As you know, a lot of the reaction to this has been pretty hostile. I guess welcome to the world of ufology. Skeptics, debunkers who don't want it to be true, come up with all kinds of excuses or possible explanations, lame as they may be, that would sort of wipe off the Tic Tac case and just throw it into the garbage bin. I mean, I've heard stuff describing that, you know, the videos, they're crappy, they're no good, they're fuzzy, they don't prove anything. It's probably a lens flare, or, you know, it's probably birds, or it's space crystals. Now, you've gone over these kind of things in your mind, and I'm sure you've probably talked about it with fellow shipmates. What do you think?
Well, I have indeed. And, oh, by the way, George, I'm myself skeptical of people who are not skeptical. So right. I think that skepticism is entirely necessary. Absolutely.
Yes. Total agreement on that. I mean, especially when you're dealing with a topic like this, you have to be a little guarded instead of jumping to conclusions. But, you know, the attacks on the video or the observational abilities of somebody like Dave Fravor, or the capabilities of the sensors that you controlled, that he controlled, I think they're misplaced. I think they're unfair.
I think given time, and one thing I'm working hard on right now, George, is I'm reaching out to some of my former shipmates, and slowly but surely, I'm starting to get people, and I'm not the only one working this, by the way, but we're starting to get people to stand up. We've had just recently people agree to come out and talk about these things. Because I have to tell you, George, it was an extremely humbling experience. All the time, money, and effort, all the experience of all those years. I just want to know what they were.
Well, we are putting out the word. We're putting out the word right now. If there are any of your fellow naval personnel who want to come forward,
please contact me. Yeah. Is it okay, George, if I give my email address for people to contact me?
Yes.
My email address is kevinmday@yahoo.com. KEVIN, M as in Mark, DAY @yahoo.com. And please contact me. And I can guarantee if you do, you will be a part of the team that's working on this.
Well, if anybody wants to contact us, we're going to be opening up the phone lines a little bit. We can open up, we're happy to take down the information and pass it on to Kevin. I won't contact you without some permission. So if you're nervous about that in any way, tell me about back to the idea of lens flares being responsible for that video. Doesn't that strike you as ridiculous?
It is ridiculous. George, you have to remember these pilots in these airplanes, they are super professional people. Hundreds of hours, millions of dollars spent training them. They're likely the best trained observers on the entire planet. They knew what they were looking at. They had their eyeballs. They saw them with their own eyes.
Or the idea that it's birds or ice crystals. I mean, you do see birds, you do have ice crystals, but they don't travel from 80,000 feet down to the ocean in a blink of an eye, or take off like a bullet out of a gun.
Indeed, they don't.
And there's no way that all of these different radar and sensor systems all malfunction multiple times over the course of several days, right?
That's correct as well. In fact, the technicians on all the ships were running any check and any test they could possibly imagine just to rule out that possibility.
Let me ask you this. This might be too sensitive, but I'll give it a try. The radar was confounded in a sense. The radars that were on the airplanes, the F-18s, they couldn't get a lock on this thing for whatever reason. To your knowledge, was there any jamming involved, or it in whatever this object was interfered with their capabilities, caused their equipment to malfunction, communications or weapon systems or anything like that, to your knowledge?
Jamming is one of those things that we use to figure out hostile intent. And at least on board the Princeton and the surface ships, there was, to the best of my knowledge, there was no jamming noted by any of a lot of electronics warfare operators on the ships. I only found out just recently that the pilots claimed there was jamming, and also the pilots claimed that these things were cloaking and decloaking, disappearing and reappearing in other places.
Well, that's pretty serious stuff to have that capability if it were an adversary, right?
Absolutely.
Let me ask you further. Now, Dave Draper and others, in the reports that we have seen, some of which have not been made public yet, have all commented about this big thing that was underwater. You have shared with us information that objects entered and exited the water. The USS Louisville, the submarine that was there as part of this carrier group, the reports that I have read so far said that whatever sensors they have, and we can't get too specific, but they didn't detect any objects underwater. If there was a really big 747-sized object, it was invisible to them. That also is kind of serious because, you've confirmed there were objects entering and exiting the water, but the Louisville, from what I read, could not detect them. Is that right?
That's right. That's the exact reports that I've heard as well. And again, when this was going on, I had no knowledge of that. I've only learned a lot of these details later on.
What were the reactions in the days that followed? I've read that there was a lot of ridicule involved, that the other naval personnel put on tinfoil hats and kind of poked fun at the pilots who went out and had the encounters. Did you see any of that?
Not on board the Princeton, but I've heard since that they went as far as to play like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And the pilots did receive a little bit of ridicule once they got back, which I'm sure wasn't fun for them.
But I mean, there had to be a heck of a lot of people, as we sort of touched on before, who knew that this was real.
Certainly everybody in the Combat Direction Center on the carrier and the Combat Information Centers on the ships and the squadrons and also the intelligence centers on the ships. All of those folks definitely knew, but there's probably 6,000 people in the strat group of that size, and quite a few people only heard of these things secondhand.
The intelligence folks, are there intelligence people on each of the ships?
Yes.
And they sort of monitor what you do. They keep track of what's on your screens and what your transmissions are?
That's a safe thing to say, true.
So they would have known that this was going on?
There's no way they wouldn't have known. That's right. That's true.
So did they come and talk to you? Did somebody, I had heard from one witness who has not been made public yet that these men in suits showed up and asked for the tapes.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the morning after this encounter, I received an email from the Fast Eagle Squadron, the Black Aces Squadron, and I thought to myself, you know what, I better start going to my own analysis and figure out what really happened. So I went up to where our external communications are supposed to be recorded. Now this machine, if you could think about an old school 8-track tape, our communications are recorded to an optical disc in multiple redundant tracks. In case there is a hazard, or in case there needs to be an investigation, we can figure out what happened. And interestingly, every time you press the transmit key on an external radio, the time hack for that moment, and also everything that's said after that gets recorded onto the optical disc, which supposedly you're not supposed to erase it. Now, interesting enough, when I went up there with the technician, his name I'll leave out for now, we were reviewing the optics of this, and believe it or not, George, all the time hacks were there for that 2-hour block of time, that all the comms were gone. So either someone swapped out that disk and I didn't know about it, or someone actually did erase it.
That would be highly unusual, right?
It was extremely unusual, yes.
Have you ever seen it before?
That happened in my entire career.
Have you seen the Tic Tacs before, or did you encounter anything like that after? I guess as part of your naval service, I'll put it that way.
Oh, no, definitely not.
I know this is a sensitive thing. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But, you know, I've covered this topic for a long time and have found that there is a pretty high percentage of people who, once they've had a close encounter like this, they have other experiences. They get like a hitchhiker attached to them, or, you know, other unusual phenomena happen, as if a doorway is opened up. I don't know if you want to get into that or not, but it would not be unusual if you continue to have experiences after your naval service.
Let me just say I agree with that. Not something I want to get into at the moment. Maybe on another interview.
All right. Well, have you, tell me about attempts to reach out to your fellow servicemen. We've made the appeal here tonight. I hope some who are listening will call in. And we don't have to use their real names or anything if they want to share their stories with us. But have you been able to connect with very many of them and sort of commiserate, or at least share notes and say, wow, now we can talk about it?
Yes, I have. Been somewhat successful doing it. Now, I will note that there's some people who won't come forward because either they are still in uniform or they're working for the Navy still as a defense contractor. And I've actually explained to them maybe they shouldn't come forward. Maybe it's too risky. But I'm totally confident we will get enough of my former shipmates together where we can collectively tell our story at some point, whether it's before the U.S. Congress or on a show like yours. Because
you have an open invitation.
It really happened, George. It really happened. And the most highly trained people in the world observed this. I mean, there's no one better at doing this thing than observing the radar. The U.S. Navy's the best at it.
Well, that's kind of what I was getting at, is the idea that, you know, people sitting at home who are armchair UFO experts lecturing to the U.S. Navy and personnel like you and Dave Fravor and saying it was lens flare or birds or ice crystals and you don't know what you're talking about. It just, it gets to me. You know, it bothers me.
It gets to me too, although I do understand where they're coming from. And frankly, I respect the skepticism. I think it's...
Well, I respect skepticism to a point, but there's a line that can be crossed with it as well, to the point of ridiculousness. Let me ask you this. Were you interviewed afterward? Did anybody interview you? Hey, what did you see? Tell us your whole story, and by the way, keep your mouth shut?
Never. Never to those questions. Which is strange.
And do you know of anybody else who was... I know Dave Fravor said nobody told him he couldn't talk about it, but we have some other people who've suggested that they were told to keep quiet, or they understood that was the standing order.
And that's entirely possible. Now, for me personally, like I mentioned before, George, that was my last underway on the Princeton, so right after the ship returned to port, I actually transferred exams. And so maybe I just fell through the cracks, I don't know, but I was never told or even hinted that I should keep quiet. In fact, it was strangely quiet after everything happened.
Yeah. Has there been any blowback for you since? Has anybody called and said, we know you were there, you better be quiet?
No.
Has there been blowback in other...
Yeah, I would be quiet.
Of course you would. What about other kind of blowback? I mean, I mentioned about your online social media encounters. I think you've been very reserved and respectful in how you respond to some of the folks, but some of it gets kind of nasty.
And I understand that, George. I do.
Well,
this UFO thing's been kicking around the American psyche for how many years now?
Long time.
Literally thousands of years in human history. These types of things have been recorded, so I completely understand the skepticism and the incredulity.
I want to go back to, you had mentioned about the day you see it on the news. Where were you when you saw it?
I was at work. I believe CNN happened to be on, and all of a sudden the report came on, and I was like, wait, what? And there before my eyes, the same video that I had possession of 14 years ago suddenly playing on the TV. And I dropped everything I was doing. I was glued to it at that point. I couldn't even believe it.
Did the event... It had been on your mind, right? You posted something.
Absolutely. It's been on my mind, George, for the last 14 years, and I have to tell you, that thing profoundly affected my life. But I would really rather not get into that right now.
Well, it's profoundly affected other people's lives as well. So, and you posted sort of a somewhat fictionalized version a couple of years ago. And I don't know if anybody paid any attention to it, but they're paying attention to it now.
Yeah, I wrote a short story called The Seer, and I published it in the book. I self-published it through the Library of Congress. The name of my book is Sailor's Anthology, Book 1. Now, if someone was just to Google that, Sailor's Anthology, Book 1, Kevin Day, you'll find it. And anyone can read my story. It's free. And it is a fictionalized account of what happened, and I was just trying to make sense of it. I didn't really want to talk about it, but I did want to report it for history's sake, I guess. So I came up with a fictional story, but the account that happened inside the ship itself is all true in that book.
I would imagine you were concerned about whether you should reveal the actual dates and all the details. You weren't quite sure how the Navy might react, maybe.
Yeah, and I did. I purposely put the wrong year and stuff that it happened.
But over the years, you shared the story with friends and family, right?
You might be able to count the total number of people I told about this on one hand.
What was the reaction?
I think they kind of half believe me at best. And George, you really can't blame them. It's a really hard thing to believe, isn't it?
Well, no, I don't think so. And from a credible guy like you, I wouldn't have trouble believing it. No.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You mentioned about seeing it on CNN, which must have been an amazing moment for you. But since then, I mean, it's continued to generate headlines. It's like, it's 8 months, almost 8 months of coverage. And although I think that the subject deserves more media coverage, it's been an amazing thing to behold, because after plugging away at this for a couple of decades, it's a new era. So give me your sense of, do you watch all that comes out on it now? Do you track it?
Absolutely. I've been involved as I can possibly be into this for at least the last 2 weeks now. This thing is just, it's happening now live. I mean, this thing is really beginning to gain steam. But what I personally want out of this, George, is I want the American people to understand that, whatever's happening is quite real. Because I think that'll do something. I think our United States Congress, if our elected representatives can feel comfortable talking about this without fearing ridicule from their constituents, then maybe finally something will be done. That's my hope.
Well, mine too.
American people, and get them to understand, yes, there is something out there.
Well, as you know, there is some discussion about engagement with staff members of Congress, maybe with elected members of Congress, not necessarily for the purpose of having hearings, but at least to maybe reignite the study. There was a study that was conducted. The Tic Tac incident was incorporated and analyzed by that study, and then the study was killed because people at the Pentagon were worried that it might seem like we're chasing aliens, and it would be embarrassing for the study to come out. You're aware of that?
I am aware of that, yes.
Any contact between you and the To the Stars people, or Luis Elizondo, any of those folks?
I think so, but I can't be certain. About 2 years ago, I was visited by two people that I can only describe as spooks. And that's another story in itself, and I never did learn where they came from. But looking back in hindsight, I think they were probably from if I had to guess, it was from one of those groups, either the ATIP program or BAAS, the Bigelow Advanced Aerospace.
Well, that's interesting because BAAS ended, I think, in 2011, 2012. Anyway, we'll be right back. We're going to open up the phone lines in just a moment where folks can ask questions of Kevin Day. Alan Parsons is a big guy. I got to meet him. He's touring now. He was at the Westgate, Las Vegas a week ago and got to see him after that show. Wow, amazing talent. We'll be right back. More Coast to Coast AM.
Try and make me change my mind and stay. But we never did too much talking anyway. But don't think twice, it's alright.